Hello everyone, my name is Theo Gavrilidis, and today's webinar is on innovation in youth work, and I'm going to be talking about what innovation is based on evidence and research that we carried out recently, and putting it in the context of COVID-19 and the changes that we're all experiencing. So if you're ready, let's start. So why innovation and why youth work? Probably if you're watching this, you are either interested in youth work, you're carrying out youth work yourself, or you're a young person, or you just have your own views about youth work as a policymaker or a decision maker. And if that is the case, or you're just somebody who just happened to watch this webinar, you probably already know that what's happened in the last few months with COVID-19, the pandemic, the lockdown, the closures of public services, including schools, educational institutions, criminal justice agencies, you name it, has impacted on everybody. We had to adjust our way of living and find new ways of addressing phenomena that probably we weren't used to before. But I'll say this, and I'm saying this from evidence and experience. One of the groups that has been impacted the most is young people. And if you are working in the youth sector, either as an educationalist or somebody in the criminal justice system, in public services or in private organizations, NGOs, you know that this is true. And this has impacted on young people in so many ways. Not only in the practicalities of just being able to go to school and continue their education or losing their jobs, but just really being locked in. It has severe impact on mental health, physical activities, depression, anxiety, and so on. So I wanted to talk about the role of youth work in this era, which doesn't seem to be changing soon. And in any way, if it does change, I don't think our life and youth work will go back to what it used to be. And therefore, the word innovation becomes very, very important. And I wanted to explore what that looks like and what it means in the different locations that you might be watching this webinar from. And how we can use this concept in an evidence-based manner to push the youth work agenda forward. And in that way, as youth workers, policymakers, or adults, take responsibility for what we have created and provide better youth services for young people and the next generation. So before I outline the content of my presentation, I wanted to mention the methodology. And I said it's evidence-based, and the evidence comes from several sources, the most important one being research that we carried out last year, in fact, not even a year ago. And this was carried out as part of the European Academy on Youth Work. And this happened in Slovenia. It was a conference, a week's conference that was prepared by a series of national agencies with the support of the European Commission. And I acted as the rapporteur for the Academy. It was the first edition, and there is a second edition taking place this year. But I'll refer to the first edition and the data, the research that we carried out on behalf of the Academy. I'll come back to the Academy in a minute. The other sources that I'm using to make my arguments are from other projects that we are carrying out at the RJ for All International Institute that I set up and currently direct, as well as research that the IRS International Institute, which is another foundation, another charity that I set up, also is carrying out with young people. For RJ for All, we have a live COVID-19 project, which is focused on young people. It's youth-led and looks at the needs of young people from a mental health perspective and provide services to them. So we have a helpline, a forum, a chat room, and through this we have collected many testimonies and statements that I'm using again as evidence for this webinar. We also publish a journal which is focused on youth policy and is called the Youth Voice Journal, and a number of papers, especially in the last few months, focused on COVID-19. So I'm just again using that knowledge, and the journal website will come up on your screen where you can go and download those papers. I will also put links to the publications that the European Academy on Youth Work produced, and there's also a dedicated website of the Academy. There were two publications I was involved in, a paper that we published before the Academy was held, and that was, it basically looked at 100 case studies that were submitted to the Academy, and some literature review that we carried out on the issue of innovation. So 100 cases, then selected cases from these 100 case studies from around Europe, and a map will come up which shows the countries that we covered in terms of case studies. So a selection of them were asked to come to the Academy in Slovenia, and they presented their case studies in workshops where we debated their results, and they were all focused on innovation. And there we tried to articulate what innovation is, what makes innovation, what drives innovation, and why is it, whether it's a good or a bad thing. There were 167 people in the Academy, so we spoke to those 167 people. They were from 37 different countries, and we asked them several questions during the week, which then led to the publication of the final book that the Academy is providing to download for free. So with all this research and data on innovation, what is it and why is it important? Well, let me just state from the beginning that I think it's a tricky concept to try and speak about innovation in youth work, and that's my view, because I think youth work by itself is innovative. And why is it innovative? Because if you actually work in youth work, then you don't need to tell me that you don't need to tell anyone, not me or anyone, that is created simply because there is a gap and because there is a need. So if public services and normal public service provision, whether it's within school or the justice system, health, you name it, arts, sports, is not providing a community with the service, and then a need is created, then we have organically the creation of youth work, and that can be done by one person that is passionate about that gap and trying to bridge that gap, or by a community organization, a small, big, medium, it doesn't matter. So if that is organic and is responding to a local need and is trying to bridge a gap, then by default I think that will be innovative. And the ideas that you see with these community-led initiatives, the organic bottom-up youth work, are amazing, particularly since if they are organic and if they are genuinely youth work, they are done in partnership with young people. And that is what I'm also passionate about, and that's why I set up for both of the organizations that I created, RJ for All and IRS, youth scrutiny panels and management boards, youth management boards, which look at not only the projects and evaluate them, but they are the ones generating the ideas for the projects that we go and fundraise and carry out, because the innovation there is organic and is true to the needs of young people. So here is now a kind of a paradox. So if innovation is attached to the concept of youth work, then why are we talking about innovation? Well, there is a need to understand how that works. So though innovation is by default attached to the concept of youth work. That doesn't actually mean that what we see labeled as youth work is actually innovative. And that's because the evidence has shown that there's different factors that drive innovation. And one I have mentioned already, and that is the organic need of a group, of a community, to create a service which then bridges a gap. But then that's their most honorable and organic reason. However, there's different trends, and those trends is what also generate youth work, or youth work in quotation marks. And one of the trends that we identified through our research is this concept of professionalization and standardization. And we saw this because more and more funders, governments, and those who are set up to support youth work in the form of either an organization providing it, or an individual or a group of individuals or young people, they want to see it in a more standardized and professional way, and putting professional in quotation marks, meaning that they're asking for certain standards to be respected, and certain registered to be filled out, and so on. And in itself, that is not a bad thing, because youth work often involves very risky and complex relationships, and safeguards need to be in place when youth work is carried out, and it should be carried out not only for with high safety provisions, but also with high ethical principles and provisions. So it's not a bad thing in itself. However, often what you get is a ticking box exercise to show that there is professionalization and standardization of youth work. The other problem that we have seen is that when funding is released by certain bodies, even European bodies that claim to be running these funding programs for youth and youth organizations, they would automatically select organizations that appear to be professional, and not actually take a risk by supporting grassroots and youth-led organizations that might not look as professional because they're organic, or because they're putting most of their time and energy into the front line and not really have the money to have an infrastructure, a very posh website or publications that would make them look professional. So that is another, let's say, trend that pushes youth work, but not necessarily innovation in youth work. There's also another trend that we identified, and we label this as co-option. And we call co-option the mixing of youth work and what youth work is with other services. And youth organizations and young people are being asked to work with public and private sectors and organizations more and more, and that is a good thing. I must stress that it's a good thing. Partnership is a good thing. However, while doing so, the organizations accepting young people and youth organizations as partners, they need to accept them as equal partners and not force their agendas or their profit making or so on ethos onto youth organizations and youth, because that would lead to co-option. And it's rarely that an organization that works with young people or in youth work that has the power to say back to those organizations that actually I will not follow your prescriptive guidance. And often we will see youth work being co-opted. Again, that's another trend that we identified, and though it might be a good thing on the one hand, as I said, it can also damage innovation and the nature of youth work as a grassroots movement. The final trend that we identified is what we call transparency. And again, transparency in itself, you hear it and you think, oh my God, that is a very, very good thing, and it is. It involves all sorts of things. When you carry out your youth work, you're transparent how you do it, but also when you receive funding, you collect data, you have an evidence-based approach, and you can say the difference that you have made to young people's lives. So transparency is good. However, again, it can also be a bad thing in the sense that evidences can divert the energy of youth workers, and when funders want this data, they don't always support the time or find a researcher that would work alongside the youth worker to support them in the evidence gathering. So funders who support youth initiatives that want them to be transparent and evidence-based should also understand that they should provide either funding separately for the evaluation and the data collection that would allow those services to be transparent, or partner with other organizations that will provide that service in kind and for free to the youth organizations. So that's kind of the trends that are both pushing but also diluting innovation in youth work, but also youth work in itself. There were also certain challenges, if you like, that we have found out to be pulling individuals to create youth work and innovation in youth work. And those challenges, in my view, is what actually innovation is. So just to give an example, we're now living in the COVID-19 era, and that is a challenge. So what I would expect now to see is youth workers and young people responding to that challenge. So I would be expecting to see projects addressing the COVID-19 consequences on young people, whether they are health-related challenges, whether they are socio-economic challenges, educational, and so on. That is a challenge that drives youth work and innovation at this point of time. The other trends, obviously, there was no COVID-19 when we held the conference in May last year in Slovenia, but there is one now. Now, what we have found in terms of challenges at the time were economic challenges for young people, so employment quite high, but also the economic downturn and the impact that it had on young people. Political, so that involved issues such as nationalism. Brexit is another example, the questioning the European identity, all those sort of things were challenges that then were creating innovative youth work practices. Social, so the discrimination, for example, and the social inequalities that we experience, that will create projects at the local level to address those challenges. And technological, so young people have different needs and accesses to technology, and they use IT and technology in a different way. So projects will be created to respond to those needs and create an infrastructure and programs that would then be timely and relevant to young people. Those were the challenges, as I said, that were creating innovation in youth work. The EU Youth Strategy, which has just been renewed, puts an emphasis, and I will conclude with this because my time is up, but there will be opportunities to get engaged with this webinar in many ways. And you can also contact us with, I'll leave the details on your screen. And also, if you are interested in webinars like this one, we host a series of webinars at RJ4All, and we have an RJ4All YouTube channel, and I'll leave the details again on the screen. So yeah, we'll conclude with the new EU Youth Strategy, which just replaced the old strategy, putting an emphasis on marginalized young people and disadvantaged young people, or I think they call it young people face barriers, socioeconomic, so on. And obviously, the European Commission and the Council of Europe acknowledge that there's more that needs to be done to support these young people. My concern remains in terms of accessing these young people and how organizations that get funding provide adequate evidences that they have accessed these young people, because there is no easy way, first of all, of doing it. And what we have experienced is the usual suspects being supported over and over again, or the groups that are easily accessible. And that is not what youth work is about. Youth work is diverse, and youth work should target young people who are most in need and at risk and so on. There's a long way to go to address that, particularly now in relation to COVID-19, where certain groups within the youth group have been affected the most. Thank you very much for watching this webinar. I hope you have found it useful, and as I said, you can always follow up with questions and we can engage in debates that you think are appropriate for your location or your project. Good luck with your work. Thank you.